The locker combination wasn't mine, but it opened my locker. I didn't realize that immediately. I was running late on the last Monday of the school year, distracted, and I'd spun the dial fast the way you do after 3 years of muscle memory. The lock clicked. I pulled it open. It was only later, sitting in first period, that I replayed the motion in my head and understood that I'd entered the wrong numbers. I'd done 32, 17, 9. My combination was 32, 7, 9. Different numbers, same result. I told myself the lock was worn out. Old equipment in an old building. The mechanism probably had some play in it, some looseness that let adjacent numbers work. I'd heard of that happening. By the time the bell rang, I'd moved on entirely. That's the thing I want you to understand before I tell you the rest of this. I was a careful person. I paid attention. I wasn't the kind of person who missed things. I'm telling you that not to make myself sound good, but because I need you to understand how good he was at this, how long it took me to see it, and I was paying attention. I was 17, second to last week of junior year. The school was one of those big public ones. 1,400 kids, 4 floors. The kind of place where you can go a full semester without seeing someone you used to eat lunch with every day. Anonymity built into the architecture. I mentioned that because it mattered. It was part of how this worked. The rule at our school, not a written rule, just understood, was that the main stairwell on the east side of the building was for up traffic only in the morning. Everyone used it going up. Nobody used it going down between 7:30 and 8:15. If you needed to go down during that window, you used the west stairs or the elevator. It was the kind of norm that develops organically in a building that size. Crowd control without enforcement. Teachers didn't mandate it. Everyone just did it. I used the east stairwell every morning to get to my first period class on the 4th floor. The first time I noticed him was a Wednesday, about 2 weeks before the end of the year. He was on the 2nd floor landing, going down, moving against everyone else coming up. That alone was odd. People didn't do that during rush time. But he wasn't struggling against the crowd. People were moving around him, not quickly, not consciously. The way water moves around something fixed. He was maybe 40, thin, wearing the kind of clothes that aren't memorable because that's the point. He wasn't looking at the stairs. He was looking at the students coming up. I passed him and kept going. On the 4th floor, I thought about it for a second, and then didn't. Thursday morning, he was in the same spot. Same landing. Same direction, descending, facing the crowd coming up. Different clothes, but the same unmemorable quality. I noticed, dismissed it, went to class. You can see already what I couldn't see yet, or wouldn't. I'm aware of that. But I want you to stay with my version for a little longer, because the dismissal isn't stupidity. It's a very human thing, the way we grant people provisional legitimacy, just by virtue of them being present in a space. He was in the school. School is a place with staff, with parents, with volunteers, with contractors. There are always adults whose roles you don't know, and he wasn't doing anything. He was just standing on a landing, watching kids go by. That's the part that should have been enough. It wasn't. For me, not yet. I don't say that with pride. Friday, I went up the west stairwell instead. No real reason. I just felt like it. I didn't connect it to him until I was halfway up and realized I'd made the choice without thinking. The following Monday, the lock opened with the wrong combination again. This time, I paid attention and confirmed it. 32, 17, 9, and it opened cleanly. I stood there with my hand on the door and thought about it. Then I went to the main office between first and second period and told the front desk my locker lock seemed broken. Could they replace it? The woman said she'd put in a work order. I asked how long. She said probably 2 weeks. 2 weeks was the end of the year. I went back to my locker after school and checked inside. Everything looked the same. I had nothing in there that felt sensitive, just textbooks, a gym bag, a jacket. I couldn't identify anything missing or moved. I told myself it was the mechanism, old hardware. Probably multiple combinations worked on half the locks in the building. I looked at the inside of the locker door. There was a small smear near the top vent, the kind of thing you'd make if you were pressing your hand flat against the inside of a door. I touched it. Dry. Not fresh. I thought, gym bag? Probably made contact. I thought that. Tuesday morning, I took the east stairwell again. I don't know why I went back to it. Maybe to check. He was on the second floor landing, and this time, he was writing something in a small notebook. He didn't look up as I passed. I kept walking. On the fourth floor landing, I stopped and looked down the stairwell. He was still on the second floor. Still writing. Third period that day, I had a free block, and I went to the library and I thought about it seriously for the first time. Not just the man. All of it together. The lock. The smear. The man on the landing with a notebook. I thought about the combination. 32, 17, 9. I thought about my actual combination. 32, 7, 9. 10 digits of difference. You'd have to know my real combination to know which adjacent numbers to test. Warren hardware might let a sloppy entry work, a 7 dialed to 6 or 8. It wouldn't let a 17 work in place of a 7. Those aren't adjacent. That's not mechanical looseness. Someone had tested my locker with a modified version of my combination, which meant someone had my combination. I sat with that for probably 5 minutes. Then I went back further. I'd had this locker for 3 years. Same combination the whole time. Who had access to that information? The school kept records. Any administrator could look it up. Any staff member with system access. I thought about the man on the landing with the notebook. I thought about how a notebook like that would look if you were using it to record things. Names, schedules, faces matched to information you'd pulled from a database. I thought about how long 2 weeks was. I thought about how the school year ended in 11 days. I want to be clear. I still didn't know anything. I had a broken lock and a man who stood on a stairwell landing. That's not evidence. I knew that. I was also 17 in a building with 1,400 other students, and I was not going to wait for evidence. I changed my route home that day. I've been walking the same way for 3 years. East exit, down the block, left on Harmon, bus stop at the corner. Instead, I went out the west exit and walked 3 blocks out of my way to a different stop. I told my friend Deja about the man on the landing. Not all of it. Just that I'd seen someone who seemed like he didn't belong, and I was being careful. She said she'd walk out with me the next few days. I said, okay. Wednesday morning, I went to the west stairwell. I couldn't help it. I detoured past the east landing on the second floor before school. He wasn't there. He was on the third floor. Different landing, same posture, notebook open. There are moments when your body makes a decision before your mind finishes the sentence. I was already moving, already past him, keeping pace with the kids around me, not looking back. By the time I reached my first period classroom, my hands were doing a thing I'd read about, but never experienced. A fine motor tremor, almost invisible, like a frequency running through my fingers. I went to the main office during second period and asked to speak with the vice principal. I said I'd seen an unfamiliar adult in the stairwells on multiple mornings, and he was taking notes on students. I said I thought someone should know. The secretary wrote it down. She said she'd pass it along. She had the tone of someone who passes things along and expects nothing to happen before they do. I asked if I could speak to the vice principal directly. She said he was in a budget meeting until noon. I went back to class. At lunch, I found Deja and told her the rest of it. The locker, the combination, the notebook, the floor change. She looked at me for a long moment and said we were walking out together and she was texting her brother to pick us up at the west exit. We had 2 more periods after lunch. I went to both of them. I don't know how to explain the decision to stay in the building except that leaving early felt like acknowledgement of something I wasn't ready to fully acknowledge. After last period, I met Deja at her locker. We walked to the west exit together. Her brother was parked across the street. We were almost to the door, maybe 30 feet from it, the crowd thinning ahead of us because most kids had already cleared out. When I looked to my left down the connecting hallway, he was at the far end, just standing, facing us. The notebook was in his hand, but he wasn't writing. I don't know if he was looking at me specifically. The hallway was long and there were still kids moving through it. But there was something about the stillness of him that I can't fully describe. Everyone else was in motion. He was not. Deja said my name once, quietly. We walked out the door at a pace that was not running but was everything below running. Into the cold afternoon air, across the street, into her brother's car. I didn't look back. I know I should have, for information, but I didn't. Her brother took me home. I told my mother that evening. All of it, in order. She called the school the next morning and spoke to the vice principal directly. She used the words systematic and recorded, and asked whether visitor logs had been checked for the past 2 weeks. I stayed home Thursday and Friday. School administration called Thursday afternoon and said they were looking into it. That was the language, looking into it. My mother asked if an unfamiliar adult had been identified. There was a pause before the answer, which was that they were working with the district on appropriate next steps. She asked if that was a yes or a no. The vice principal said he wasn't able to share details of an ongoing review. When school resumed the following Monday, the actual last week, I went back. I checked the east stairwell landing. Nobody. I checked my locker with my real combination and then with the modified one. The modified one no longer worked. The lock had been replaced while I was absent. A new one, sticker still on the back with the new combo. Nobody told me it had been replaced. I found out when my old combination didn't work. That small thing. The fact that they'd quietly changed my lock without mentioning it to me, without confirming what I'd reported, without any explanation. That told me more than a direct answer would have. Something I'd reported had been verified. The lock confirmed it. They just weren't going to tell me what. The man was never there again. The last week of school. I looked every morning. I watched the stairwells. I changed my route every single day. A different exit each time. No pattern to it. Deja thought I was being too cautious by then. She was probably right. On the last day, walking out for the summer, I went through the east exit for the first time in 2 weeks. Just to use it, to take the route back. 2 kids ahead of me were complaining about exams and making plans for the weekend, and the door opened into the June afternoon, and I thought, okay, it's over. In the bus on the way home, I went through my bag for my earbuds and found a folded piece of paper at the bottom of the front pocket. Small, white, creased like it had been folded to fit through a vent. My name was on the outside. My full name, first and last, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I did not open it. I want to be precise about that. I held it for a moment and then I held it differently by one corner, not touching the main surface, and I put it in a clean part of my bag away from everything else. I got off at my stop and went straight home and gave it to my mother without opening it. She called the school. Then she called the non-emergency police line. An officer came that afternoon and took the note in a small paper bag. I never found out what it said. I've thought about that a lot in the years since. Whether knowing would have been better or worse. Whether it would have answered the question I keep returning to. The one I can't resolve no matter how many times I turn it over. Because here's what I understand now that I didn't understand fully then. The notebook, the landing, the modified combination. The note placed in a bag I'd been carrying for weeks, slipped through a locker vent. That's not impulsive behavior. That's patient behavior. That's someone who had been doing this long enough to have a method, to have refined it, to have identified which students could be isolated from their known routes, their known circles. The end of the school year was the timeline. Summer was the window. And I was not the only name in that notebook. I know I wasn't because the school changed 3 locks that week. Not just mine, 3. So, here is the thing I haven't been able to answer. And I'm asking you because I've lived with it long enough that I don't trust my own thinking on it anymore. He had been in that building for at least 2 weeks before I noticed him, moving between floors, refining his list, testing combinations. The building had 1,400 students and the kind of institutional invisibility that comes from being just large enough. What I can't stop wondering is not whether he was caught. I don't know that he was. What I can't stop wondering is this. Somewhere in that notebook, there were names of students who never noticed him on the stairs, never tested their locker twice, never said anything to anyone. Do they know, even now, that their name was written down?